I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsor, Viatris, for their support. I'm going to start this introduction by saying that Bob Coughlin is a CF dad, but there is a lot more to say about him. He served as a state representative in Massachusetts from 2003 to 2007, so he knows politics and continues to work as a CF advocate for his son Bobby and for everyone. I also learned a lot about Bob and the industry growing through his beautiful resume, and he is currently the managing director at JLL, a real estate firm, and is the New England's Life Science and Healthcare Practice Group Lead. And what Bob is so interesting is that he specializes in the representation of lab, GMP manufacturing, and technology. And I did look to see what GMP stands for because it's new to me, and it is good manufacturing practice, and I found it very interesting. It's a system that ensures products are consistently produced and controlled according to quality standards, which, as I said, I do find quite interesting. I always love to learn what people do, and especially if it's something like this and I don't know anything about it. And Bob aligns real estate strategies and scientific business objectives, which is very cool, if you ask me, because he's on numerous boards and is extremely involved in work, life, and organizations, and it all is very serendipitous around cystic fibrosis. Bob, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Laura. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that we actually got to meet in person before doing this podcast. A lot of times I don't meet people in person just because the way the world has come out of the pandemic. Sure. And so we did, and then we have a mutual friend, Dr. Stephen Rapundolo, who is the president of MishBio, and then I learned you were with MassBio, and you were the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council, so that's all very cool.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working alongside of Steve and our colleagues from all over the country. I was at the helm of MassBio for about 14 years, and it was a great run. It certainly was.
It's a fabulous organization, and I have to say, I didn't discover it until Stephen approached me in 2019, and we've been working on some legislation together. But I encourage everyone to get involved in the bio that's in their state, whether it's MassBio, MishBio, whatever it is, Vermont Bio, Connecticut, whatever. They're great organizations, really science, technology. It's like everything we're about, and it's really I've learned so much from all the people and all the conferences and everything, so it's great.
Absolutely It's a wonderful industry, and we're going to talk about it today, and we're all very grateful for it.
We are. And first I wanted to start with telling everybody that you have 3 kids, your daughter Mary Kate, your son Paul, and then Bobby. Is he 22 years old now?
Yeah, Bobby's 22, and he's the one that has cystic fibrosis.
And how is he doing today? Let's start off with an update on how he is.
Oh, it's great. I love it. Let's start with today as opposed to 22 years ago and what the outlook with cystic fibrosis. I love talking about today because he's a 22-year-old young man who, all things considered, is very healthy, right? Which is amazing for a 22-year-old who's been battling cystic fibrosis, obviously, since the day he was born. I get a little emotional when I talk about it because we're at a point in our lives that we didn't know if we'd make it this far. And, he was pretty sick in high school, and, we didn't think he'd go to college, but he did. He took his first dose of Trikafta when he was 18 and went on and graduated from college. And now he actually works at MassBio, my old place of employment, as a member engagement specialist and a patient advocate. So he's really come full circle, and he's doing amazing. So thank you so much for asking about that.
Wow, that is fantastic. And it is emotional, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I remember my girls are older. Molly's 30 and Emily's 27, but I remember that diagnosis. And I was at every 3 month meeting, or not meeting, at clinic visit. Well, how long are they going to live? How old are they
Right?
going to be?
Yeah.
So that's changed for you because new medications and everything give us more optimism for the future, right?
Yeah, you bet they do. I mean, it's interesting you see that, and I know that the listeners, if you're viewing, you could see, but the listeners can't, so I'll describe it to you. There's a drawing of, it says hope on it. And it was
Behind you.
yeah, and the artist was actually a young lady who I've known, who I knew for years, that actually passed away at the age of 18 from cystic fibrosis, and that was only about 6, 7 years ago. And but what did she write? She wrote hope, and it was this industry and the advocates and the CF Foundation and so many families like yours and ours, Laura, who have really stepped up to fight and fight and fight. And it was that fight and the investment in technology and science and advancements in policy, which are also important, that created hope for people with CF. And it's just amazing to see that hope become a reality. And we've been able to do that, in our kids' lifetime, which is
And
a
tell us what
blessing.
her name was because I love remembering people who have passed. It breaks my heart, but I always try to remember them.
Yeah, it's Fallon Finnegan, and it's just it's something that I don't know. We're bouncing all over the place here already, but I guess I have a genetic mutation for cystic fibrosis. I got ADHD too, so it's okay if we bounce around a bit. But one of the things that makes me really sad is the fact that a drug like Trikafta couldn't come around sooner. It took 18 years and about $13 billion to invent that drug, and Vertex is everyone at Vertex is a hero of mine. You know that, and all of us
Right.
in the community. But it's just so sad. I got into this industry back in 1995 before I even had kids. I got involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation because my brother Johnny married into a family that had 3 children with CF, little babies, and then a buddy of mine who I played hockey with growing up had 2 children with cystic fibrosis, and I was elected to the Board of Selectmen in my town. And one of the first things that they would ask when you were starting a Great Strides for CF Walk, they said, get a local politician to become your chair of the walk. And I agreed to do it when I was 25 years old and didn't, my wife and I were engaged, but we weren't even married yet. And I became the chair of the first Great Strides Walk in the town of Dedham, Massachusetts, because I was on the Board of Selectmen at the time, which is like the town council. These 5 little kids that I knew all had cystic fibrosis. And I honestly didn't even know what the disease was, but I knew it was bad and these kids were dying. So I got involved and, chaired that walk in 95, 96, 97, 98, got married, had a couple healthy kids. And, Bobby was born in 2002. And that's when we found out that we had cystic fibrosis in my and my wife's family, because it wasn't a standard genetic screening for pregnant women when I had Mary Kate and Paul.
Right.
But it was when we were having Bobby. So we found out Christine was a carrier, and I was like, don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. We have 2 healthy kids. Because think about it, the 2 families that I knew had 3 kids all with CF, and the other family had 2 with CF. So I thought every kid had to have CF. So I'm like, oh, we're out of the woods. Nothing to worry about. I'm not a carrier. Well, boom, I got tested, found out I was a carrier, and we found out at 21 weeks in utero that this unborn baby was going to have cystic fibrosis. And people were like, geez, you must have known all along, because we had already raised over $1 million for CF research before we even found out. Talk about a curveball coming from the universe, right?
Serendipity, right?
Yeah,
I
it's like,
mean,
yeah,
that is.
yeah, and that's how it happened. But the point of the story is this going back to the survivor's guilt type, if you would, was, my brother's niece and 2 nephews all passed away at 16, 18, and 21, and that's all in the last 10 years. For my family growing up with little Bobby being, affected by the disease and getting pretty sick at times, it was scary. And now a lot of that fear has been removed because we do have a longer runway now with this therapy. It's not a cure, it's a therapy.
Right.
And not only is it, it's a great therapy, but there's still, let's say, 5 to 10% of the population that doesn't have access to one of these breakthrough therapies. It's the same. Can't give up until they have something. And, and we can continue to be sad about the people that we can get it done in time for. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I don't mind jumping all over the place. People can follow us. I mean,
Yeah, they
it is the emotional roller coaster of CF, sort of, right? Also. And I think our stories are similar. The serendipity of the disease. I started in radio, which trained me to be able to have a voice, to get to the lawmakers like
Yeah.
you, that I needed to get to and that I needed to talk to. And I was not married to my husband. I met Dr. Francis Collins in
Yeah.
his lab just before he discovered the gene that caused CF. Like,
Oh,
how
wow.
crazy is
Yeah,
that?
you're going
So
back to the
we have,
80s, yeah.
yes, it's like it's crazy. So it is. I feel like that this has been our purpose. Like, my passion was definitely news reporting, and then my purpose is definitely cystic fibrosis and combining both for sure. And then when I read everything about you, I thought, oh, well, of course Bobby has CF, because it was like in the plan, whether, not everybody believes it, but it's just so, you're the perfect person. You're a great advocate. I think it's all helped you, get to where you are now, continuing to advocate for cystic fibrosis.
It was weird, Laura. When Bobby was born, well, I decided to retire from the career that I was in and become a full-time, public servant, an elected official. I was leaving, I'd spent one term on the school board in my town, then 3 terms on the board of selectmen. And when I was 30, I decided I wanted to move towards becoming a full-time politician, which sounds crazy now. God bless me. What was I thinking? But I loved
I
public
love
service,
it.
and I loved veterans issues. I loved senior issues. I loved, helping with healthcare. But I never thought for a second that my primary function in life would be to become a caregiver and a patient advocate. Like, I didn't see that coming. And Bobby was diagnosed in utero while I was in this campaign of a lifetime running for the House of Representatives here in Massachusetts. And I was going to get out of the race. When we found out, we went over to Boston Children's Hospital. We'd already known people from the CF Foundation. Because again, think of this irony, right? Like, even Bob Bell at the time thought, well, you already knew you were a carrier, right? And your wife. And I was like, no, we didn't. And, God bless Joe O'Donnell, who's my hero from the Joey Fund. He called me up and he's like, well, you knew, right? I'm like, no, I didn't. So we had the baby, and I remember Joe came over the day after Bobby was born on May 2nd that year, and he came and visited, and he said, hey, we're going to go raise $100 million and buy a cure for your kid so he doesn't die like my kid. And at the same time, you can change laws in this godforsaken state so we can get better at biotech. Because I won my election for the House of Representatives, and then there were companies like Genzyme and Vertex and Millennium and Biogen that were doing this thing called biotech. I went to a merchant marine academy to learn how to run the plant of ships, right? I got into environmental services as an engineer. I don't know if I should even be saying this, but I think I flunked biology in high school and college. I went out to have the best job in biotech in the world.
I mean, it's so hopeful for all of us. Just
It's hope,
trying
right?
to, yeah.
In the legislature, I was spending more and more time changing laws so that these biotech companies had a better chance of solving unmet medical need. Things like attacking somatic cell nuclear transfer, which back in the time was stem cell research, changing archaic ordinances, laws, and statutes that weren't conducive for laboratories to do what they do around large molecule drugs and ultimately cell and gene therapy. And look what Vertex were using, RNA interference. And, it was just all this stuff that who would have thought that good policy, the intersection between policy and innovation. I didn't know it existed until 2003, right? And to see or 2001 even. And when we started changing these laws, I found myself spending more time doing things that were important for biotech, life sciences, and then raising money with the CF Foundation so we could invest in companies like Vertex, FoldRx, Combinatorics, Epix, Altus, Alnylam, Elnara. The list goes on. Hey, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but man, I can raise money and change laws like the best of them. So let's just focus on that. And that led me to working on the 10-year billion-dollar life science initiative with Governor Deval Patrick at the time. And we were able to, boom, bang that out. And it was a shot heard around the world saying, in Massachusetts, we want to be the best place to solve unmet medical need, cure diseases, help patients, create tomorrows, blah, 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 all of that stuff, right? And it kind of turned into a full-time job. And I basically left government to take over Mass Bio. That was what, September 1st, 2007. And it was a great run to be able to work in biotech, whether it was innovation, policy, economic development, all the important aspects of creating a world-class ecosystem to become the top place in the world for innovation. And why? Not because I was excited about all that stuff. The only thing I really cared about was that Bobby and other people who were sick could get therapies and stay alive. And, it's a great way to not hit the snooze button in the morning when you're driven with passion for a purpose that doesn't leave your head ever.
Well, and thanks for all you've done for Bobby's future and my girl's future and all these kids, because it's huge and so important to all of us. And I wonder, I've been advocating for the girls since the diagnosis, but it seems to be at a frenzy right now. I just wondered what you think about advocating. I mean, we have so much legislation we're working on in Michigan. There's so many. Oh, there's the prescription drug affordability emergency going on currently in Virginia. And then there's the Rare Disease Advisory Council we're trying to pass in Michigan. Do you see that we have to educate more, or how not everybody's in love with science and innovation anymore. Not everybody thinks vaccines are great. So, because it seems like there's a lot of work, obviously, still to do. But I'm just wondering what you think about advocacy and kind of the future for medicine and science.
I left Mass Bio 4 years ago on February 1st. So I've kind of I refer to it in academic terms as my sabbatical from running a life science trade association and being involved in policy day to day. But I still can't help myself, and I still get involved, obviously, at the state and federal level with former colleagues who are elected officials. And when you look at social media, right? I can't stand social media, but if it weren't for social media, patient advocacy wouldn't have become a real thing. Because in the old days, you listened to your doctor, and that was it. Hey, I thought doctors invented cures or therapies, right? That's what I thought when Bobby was born, diagnosed over 22 years ago. So I learned real quick that, the doctors aren't just going to do it alone. You got to raise money, you got to create companies, you got to invest in innovation. I learned that drugs aren't too expensive. They're just way too expensive to invent. And if you're focusing on rare genetic disorders and orphan diseases, game on, because there's not going to be a big market. So yeah, they're going to cost a lot of money, but they avoid costs and they keep people alive. So we'll come back to that. But in back then, you listen to your doctors and you listen to your politicians. Oh, we know better. Screw that. There's about, 10,000 pieces of legislation filed every session in every state. There's an elected official in the world that can be an expert on all of them. So if they don't rely on their constituents, the people that they represent, to be educated on these issues, shame on them. And social media gave us a platform so that we could bring all the people with CF together, bring all the families who have boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy together, bring together all the young people with sickle cell, middle-aged and older people with sickle cell, bring them all together and start fighting for legislation that's going to help these patients ultimately. So we'd literally use our distribution list to get all rid of patient one of my favorite days of the year is like Rare Disease Day, where we have our patient advocacy to march on the Hill, and would partner with NORD and all these other groups, and we'd pull together 600 to 1,000 sick people. I'm ear quoting right now. So I say sick people to march on the Hill and let their elected officials know that if you don't vote the way we want, we're going to vote you out, right? We're going to send you, clippings of obituaries of our loved ones, because you're responsible for not. And let's take this seriously. And we were able to change the image of the life sciences industry in Massachusetts to that of one that cures diseases and helps patients. Laura, it's easy for us to say, right? Because we live it every day. But, you know how many times be fighting with politicians or people over drug pricing, and then the minute they have cancer, and this may sound harsh, they'll call up and say, oh, I need to know everything. I need the best. What's the best treatment out there? I'm like, this is what we've been talking about.
Right. That's
years.
First Lady Nancy Reagan. That was the whole thing with Ronald Reagan and against stem cells, and then for it when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
That was my biggest example of people get it.
Everybody hates the pharma industry until they need a drug. And ultimately, wake up, people. We're all going to be patients. Ultimately, we all are.
Exactly.
So it's about wellness. And I think we'd be remiss, too, Laura, if we didn't talk about, all right, little Bobby. I can't call him little Bobby anymore because he's about 6'3.5" and 185 pounds, right? Since he's taken Trikafta, he's grown over 12 inches. He's gained over 50 pounds. His lung function's back to what it was when he was 4 years old, and he hasn't stayed overnight in the hospital once. So is the drug that he takes every day expensive? Of course it is. But he's saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in not being in the hospital. And he has a job, and he pays taxes. He's getting his own health benefits. So when you look at costs avoided, the best thing we can do in this country is focus on wellness. This long-term care of sick people is really expensive. If you're avoiding costs in the hospital setting, and you're avoiding transplants, and you're avoiding all these other therapies, because of one therapy, people focus on that one drug that's expensive, and they forget about the other $500,000 a year that you're not paying on health care, because we don't capture costs avoided. The system needs to change. It's busted.
Yeah.
We don't do anything to promote wellness. We don't have a health care system. We have a sick care system. We got to flip that on its head.
I love your energy, and I love talking about this, and we are getting back to Bobby because I do want to, but I have to say, if you could move to Michigan and help us here, we could really use you. But, you stay where you are. You're doing great things. But, yeah, it's all so true, and I hope people hear you because I do feel like we say it all the time and even repeatedly to politicians, and it is frustrating, but we have to keep going because there is no alternative. It's really important, and we have to leave the world better for our rare disease kids than when we started with them. It's really important. And Bobby, before you started talking about Trikafta, but I wanted to talk about when his health started declining. I think it was 2013, 2015, what I read. It was at that time period. That's a scary time. Take us to how scary that was when his health declined, how everybody was doing emotionally, mentally, and then when the drug comes through in 2019.
Yeah. It got really tough when Bobby was coming out of middle school into high school. So what's that? Probably like 14 into 15.
Mm-hmm.
And because he has also cystic fibrosis related liver disease, his liver got to the point, and his spleen and his gallbladder, everything was so swollen, and his liver was so big that he couldn't clot blood anymore. And, he's facing end-stage liver disease. His lung function had dropped significantly, and it was year over year. But the thing that affected us the most was the fact that going from 8th grade into 9th grade, the doctors said, you can't have physical activity anymore. You can't play hockey. And Bobby was an unbelievable hockey player. People say where God taketh, he giveth a little extra. Well, this kid had it. I played hockey, not like he did, and his mom was a bit of an athlete too, but not like he was. So it was like, and my two other kids would laugh. They're like, this kid has CF, and he's like, plays hockey. Like, to you listeners out there that may not like the Boston Bruins, you probably don't like Brad Marchand. Well, little Bobby played like Brad Marchand. He was scrappy, he was little, he was fast, and he was good. And it was kind of like his thing. And then imagine being, in puberty, right? And going to high school and finding out that, hey, because of your CF, because of your liver disease, which is an added bonus, is probably only 10% of the folks that have cystic fibrosis get cystic fibrosis related liver disease. It means your liver scars up just like everything else and ultimately just doesn't work the way it should, and it gets big, and a lot of other things happen. Portal hypertension occurs, and you can't clot blood. And you don't want to get checked by some big high school kid because you could die. So the reality of that smack in the face is when we really started to panic. And I was already at Mass Bio. Vertex has already come across and invented, Kaleido that didn't work for his particular mutation. Not to get into the weeds too much, but I have the 508 delta mutation, which is the common one. My wife, Christine, has a 1717 minus 1, which we thought because of his heterozygous mutation combination, we got to the point back then, and having known so much about the industry and the science, and Josh Boger, who founded Vertex, is a dear friend. He's still a dear friend of mine. He was one of the reasons I left government to join, to lead Mass Bio. I knew a lot. I knew too much. I wish I didn't, quite frankly, because it created a mental state that probably wasn't good for me for a long time, because I felt that the Vertex science, the RNAi approach, the modulator approach wasn't going to work for Bobby because of his mutation situation. So we kind of started doubling down a bit on gene therapy and trying to think of some other things. And then ultimately, so the audience knows, Vertex was able to figure out with a new updated triple combination product that it could work for one copy of the 508 delta mutation. So when we found out there could be something that happens in his lifetime, obviously it was amazing. But when he couldn't play hockey to the point, that freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year in high school is when we saw the reality of the illness moving quicker than we felt like we were moving. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and I remember when David Altula, who's the chief scientific officer over at Vertex, he came over from the Broad Institute, world-renowned. And he's one of the people who mapped the human genome, all right? So if you're one of the people that mapped the human genome, you go to a company, and we got really close, and I started having hope again based on what they were doing. And then, when we found out, when Jeff Leiden was the CEO of Vertex at the time, he called me up and said, hey, we got this. We got something that's going to work for a lot of these kids, including your son. And I mean, I can't even tell you, like, if you could have bottled that emotion, like, we could sell it, we'd all be multi-billionaires, because it was a combination of relief, joy, like elation, like it was just this miraculous feeling, like you can't describe it. It was like the weight of the world. And this is before he even took a dose of the drug, because he was too sick to be in the clinical. He wasn't in any of the clinical trials since the liver disease came on. So we just kind of hanging back, hoping and waiting and doing everything we could to just be positive. And when he got his first dose, it was November 8, 2019. I mean, within 2 or 3 days, Laura, like, he lost that raspy sound in his voice. He wasn't coughing at night. This was like really quick. And then the weight gain, and then, to have that down and then to have that up. And again, hey, let's be real. We're not completely out of the woods yet. This isn't a cure, and there's still patients that don't have it. And we can talk more about that. But man, talk about a feeling of 1 month. You cry in the shower in the morning because you literally have nightmares about going to your child's funeral. And then knowing that your kid can live longer than you, and that's all you want.
Right.
Like, I don't want to die young. You don't want to die young, but you want to die before your kids.
Right.
And having that feeling switch almost in like a 24-hour period, you can't describe it. You can't.
I mean, I can't think of a better way to describe it, but you really can breathe again. I mean, it's the whole, I felt so Emily is sicker than Molly. When she finally was able to take Trikafta because she had a reaction at first, I felt the same thing you're saying. You feel like, oh my gosh, they're going to live. They can get married. There's a future.
And we're fortunate to have such an amazing network of, disease foundation friends. It's really family, right? I mean, I spent this morning with a young CF dad that has a 2-year-old with CF. I spent 45 minutes with him this morning, the same way Joe O'Donnell used to do it with me, right? He lost his son. He was there for me all the time. And we try to do that back. And sometimes you just feel like the only, I have a podcast that I do. It's called In Sickness, and it's men who are caregivers. because we're
Oh,
trying
I
to
love
destig.
that.
Yeah.
We will put that. It's in show notes.
Okay.
So
Yeah. And you should come on it sometime. And
I would love
it's,
to.
we're just trying, like, when one of the reasons I do it, and my partner on the podcast, my co-host, he takes care of his wife that has Parkinson's disease. And he's known me. He used to work at Millennium Pharmaceuticals, so he knew me through my career. He said, Bob, you always talk about, being a dad as a caregiver when typically, and believe me, I'm not trying to take any credit away from my lovely wife, Christine, because she is the primary caregiver and she has been since day one, and she's amazing. There were things I did and there were things she did, and we're a good team, right? But the reality is, some of the times, the only time I could really feel like I was understood is when I would talk to other dads who had kids with CF. It was like a group of us up here that would just talk to each other, just because you knew the person understood what you were going through, right? When
Yeah.
people at work were giving you a hard time because your kid's living in children's hospital and you're running around and you're trying to do your job and sleep nights at children's hospital, and then you're listening to them complain about how their kid has an ear infection, and you literally want to fist fight people, but you can't. So, like, you need someone to talk to about that stuff. So that's why we created the podcast for caregiving, where people could come and, talk.
I love that because I think the dad perspective is so important. And I have found trying to get dads better now than when I started trying to get dads involved in our education days. And even my husband, getting him to talk about it. His standard answers was, everything is fine. It's all going to be fine. Like, that was his, like, denial of everything, whatever. And then I thought, you know what? I am putting him in touch with a couple other CF dads. They can talk about golf. They can drink whiskey. They can do whatever. You guys, you communicate different than women do. And so once he started opening up to other dads, it was huge. And then he started talking to me, which I really appreciated, because sometimes as the mom, you do feel a little bit alone, even though you're not. And my husband took care of whoever was the healthy child, and I was always in the hospital with the sick kids. So you do figure it out. But for his sake, I was glad that he could open up and start talking to other dads. So,
You bet.
oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're doing that. We have to
especially
talk.
for
It's
genetic
really important.
diseases, dude. There's not a man in the world that wants to admit he has a genetic defect. Never mind pass it off to their child.
Right.
That's a big deal for the male ego.
Right. And my husband has 5 siblings, men. I mean, they're all, brothers.
Your husband has 5 brothers. I have 5. I have
yeah.
5 brothers. I'm the youngest of 6 boys.
He is 7 of 8. He had 2
Wow.
sisters and 5 brothers. So
That's
it's
awesome.
crazy. You'll have to talk.
Yes.
But how did Bobby do? How did all of you do mentally? Because I am on and off at therapy. My girls are in therapy. I just wonder, how did you do, once Trikafta was introduced? I mean, your whole brain changes then. You're like, what?
I remember having a conversation with Bobby, because, like, we used to do crazy stuff when he was, like, growing up. I bought a boat, a big, huge boat that we really couldn't even afford at the time. And we used to kind of call it our Coughlin Make-A-Wish. Like, we lived, because my fear was that with working so much and dealing, and, life happens, and you have 2 healthy kids that you still want to try to, and again, I'm using air quotes again, because you're not supposed to use the word normal, but you want a normal life and normal kids. And it's really hard because kids don't understand the difference between good attention and bad attention. And when you have a kid that's sick, they're going to get attention. So how do you make sure that the other ones aren't, screwed up because of it? So we would always, we lived like we were dying, and it was amazing. We would make sure we had a trip. We had this boat where we went everywhere on it. Like, and when you're on the boat, there's no kids knocking at your door. You're not playing video games. You have family time. You're learning how to navigate. You're fishing. You're swimming. It was just a great way. And the reason, Laura, you'll get a kick out of this. It was one time we were at Boston Children's Hospital. It was when the hypertonic saline was becoming a reality, and people were saying this inhaled saline solution that's 6 times saltier than seawater is the best therapy that's available to kids with CF. And I'm like, shit, I should go buy a boat. Christine was in Florida on vacation with her sister, and I
Oh my
bought
gosh.
a big, huge boat while she was away. She didn't even see it. And I'm like, either we're going to get divorced and I'm going to live on the boat, or she's going to love it, and we're off to either way, it's going to be great. And we loved it as a family. We named the boat 65 Roses. You can Google it and see it
Oh,
online. The boat
wow.
was called 65 Roses, and it reminded us that every day was special and we needed to make the most of it. And it's funny, when Trikafta became a reality, we bought a smaller fishing boat that Bobby uses, and the name of that's Breathe Easy. And the reason I would justify these crazy expenses that we probably never should have done was because the salt water was good for Bobby's health, and that's why we used to go boating all the time. But the point of the story is, when Trikafta became a reality, Bobby was like, hey, he goes, does that mean the party's over? And I said, no, it doesn't. It means the party's beginning. And we're never, ever, ever going to not appreciate the importance of how special every day is. Every day, right? And we're not going to let the little stuff bother us. And we're going to celebrate the wins. And every day is. It's special. And like that song, Live Like You're Dying, right? I mean, it's not about how you died. It's about how you lived. And no matter what happened, like, no one in the world could say we didn't live, no matter what.
I love that. I love it. I mean, we do the same. And I kind of feel in the CF community, everybody really gets it. Anybody with a chronic illness or a rare disease, right? You get how important every day is. And I'm just really grateful that I ran into you in Boston
Yeah.
and found out about, and you just keep going because you are on fire and you are an inspiration. I was inspired when I, read about you, when I met you, and now even more, just hearing you talk. You are speaking for all of us, and I love your passion. You've got us all covered, I would say.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things are you looking for as we wrap up here for Bobby's future, and then in the cystic fibrosis community? What are your hopes, or what are your plans in going forward?
Yeah, I'm still bullish on gene therapy. I think, and the lung is a tricky organ to do that too. But I think in our kids' lifetimes now, because of the runway that we have from the modulators, that cell and gene therapy can be a reality in their lifetime. And that's, you've heard it. CF can ultimately stand for cure found. Like, I'm not going to give up until, and none of us are going to give up until these poor CF patients that don't have a therapy, they need one. They're still dying. Okay. And we can't, just because we're doing well, we can't think everybody is. And we need to make sure that we continue the fight to get therapies that'll work for more of the population, ultimately the entire population, and then ultimately a cure. And why is this isn't just a CF thing, Laura. This is, you use this science, you can use it for cancer, you can use it for all other genetic illnesses. You can use it, it helps everything. You look at diseases like Huntington's, Parkinson's, Duchenne muscular
Sickle
dystrophy,
cell.
sickle cell, they've done it, right? They're going to do it in type 1 diabetes. Come on. Like, this is
Right.
the stuff you got to take all that money that we raised at the CF Foundation, continue to focus on CF related science, but it's also going to help with all these other indications. And, obviously we're not out of the woods. Bobby's going to need a liver transplant. I mean, we ignore it. We even the doctors say, we'll tell you when it's time to think about it. We purposely try not to think about it because you just want to live every day. And, we'll figure out how, when, and that's going to be done. And when it does, obviously, we're going to be really worried. It's going to stink. But so what? He's alive, and we'll deal with it the same way we've dealt with everything else. And until then, he's got a job. He's dating girls now, like a lot of them. I'm like, dude, you got to slow down. It's funny. But, he's like, Dad, I'm making up for lost time. And he is. And hasn't had the easiest of life, but he's making the most of it. And it's really cool now because I'm still on the board at Mass Bio and I'm very involved, and, he works there, and, albeit I work in real estate now, but I only represent life science companies because I love helping them save money so that they can spend more money on science and help patients more. So I've kind of shifted my career at the end of the career here to do lab focused, whether it's hospitals or biotech companies, real estate development and brokerage. And I still get to work with Bobby. Like when I go to
Oh, that's
meetings, he'll be there, and it's cool. It's just it's really amazing. And even Mary Kate is a nurse practitioner, pediatric nurse
oh
practitioner that
wow.
sees kids that she's in the industry. And even my son Paul went to the Massachusetts Maritime Academy where I went. He's a facilities engineer, and he works in biotech labs in all the MIT buildings over in Kendall Square. So it's like we could all end up having lunch talking about the same stuff, and it's kind of become a family affair. And if it weren't for Bobby and his illness, that never ever 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 would have happened. I wouldn't have had the career that I've had. I wouldn't have had the sense of purpose and accomplishment. And
And maybe courage to do what you did. You ran for Congress. I mean,
yeah, it's wacky, right? And that's why, no matter what life sends your way, there's only one thing there's only one thing you can control, and that's your outlook. Have a good outlook. Try not to get all seized up in the fetal position. Try not to. I mean, what were the alternatives for me? I would have drank too much, right? And I
right.
can't. That wouldn't have been helpful. I could have just curled up in the fetal position. That wouldn't have been helpful. So for me to feel like I could be part of the solution, it was. And again, not being a doctor, not being a scientist, what are you going to do? So that's what I could do, and we did it. And a whole heck of a lot of people are doing it. And I couldn't pick another village that I'd rather be a part of because we, yourself included, and so many others. It's like, look what we've been able to do in, a couple decades. I don't know if like the book Breath from Salt, that's about Joe
Yes,
O'Donnell. And
visual.
yeah, and, I have a bunch of copies right here behind me. I give them
I
out
have
to
some in
everybody I
front of
meet
me.
with.
Yeah,
And I mean, what a story. What a
right.
story. To in a lifetime change the course of a disease.
Right.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal. I was not mentioned in chapter 4, but I was there when
Oh,
Fred Van Gore came out
yes.
after we all testified about Orkambi, and he had tears in his eyes. And
Yeah, I
I was
know.
screaming when I read that chapter. I was like, I was there. I mean, yes, our community is wonderful.
Yeah.
And I never want to end this podcast,
Yeah.
honestly, because you're incredible.
Oh,
And
thank
I'm
you. You
so
are. You
glad.
are.
Well, thank you. But I'm so glad that we have you in the CF community for everything you've done and all the things you are doing, and your kids and your wife. And I have to meet her
Yeah, you
sometime.
will. You will.
Yeah,
Hey, Laura, you should have Gunnar Esiason on too. I don't know if you've had him
I
on yet.
did. He's
Okay. Isn't he the
phenomenal.
best? And
He
that
is the best.
ESPN E90 special the E60 special that they had on Christmas Eve. I mean, it was
He's doing great
awesome.
things for men with CF and
Oh, you bet
IVF.
he
And
is.
oh my gosh, we
Yeah,
have
he
so
works in
many
my industry
heroes.
now, so I get to talk to him a lot. And he's become like a great, a wonderful young man. And his dad Boomer, who's a good friend as well, is a hero as well. The amount for him, the way he was able to use his platform to advance, we wouldn't be where we are today without their family. And I love them.
Right. I agree. And I tell people scientists are my Taylor Swift. If people, whoever loves Taylor Swift, like scientists, that's my Taylor Swift. You invite me to talk
Yeah,
with Paul or
yeah,
Sabine or Fred or,
yeah.
whom, that's my Taylor Swift. I
I
would
got
rather
oh,
pay
I
for
got a
that,
I got a great picture of the dinner at the Vertex dinner that we had during
Mm-hmm.
NAHCF, the conference in Boston, and I have it hanging in my office down on the Cape, and that's one of my favorite pictures in the world. Imagine getting to have dinner with the three people who invented a drug that's keeping your child alive.
Yeah, you can't even describe it. It's unbelievable. Every time I talk to them, I am in awe. I am just like, wow. So, well, is there anything else you wanted to mention about the future or where you're going? I think you've said so many wonderful things, but if there's something else that you wanted to share about the future, I know a lift track came out, the new CF modulator. My daughters have not been switched to it yet. I don't know that they will. It's different for every patient, but so exciting.
Yeah, it's got less toxicity, less side effects. It's one a day instead of a second at night. So these drugs are going to continue to get better. And I think the message that we want to leave with your listeners is that we've literally gone from the golden age of science to the platinum age. We're not going to be talking about therapies anymore. We're going to be talking about cures. You're going to be able to change your body so that you don't have the disease anymore. And that is amazing. It's going to help get our arms around healthcare costs. It's going to promote wellness. It's going to just, it's amazing. And so when people say, like, it's been a very difficult last few years, right, in the economy and whatnot. But when we think about science, the future is so bright. It is so bright. And that hope is so alive and real. So everybody should embrace it and be happy.
Well, thank you so much, Bob Coughlin. Thanks for being on the podcast. It was great to talk to you. And I'm going to have the best day now that we had this conversation.
They're all the best. I do that every day. Whether it is or isn't, I convince myself it is.
I love that.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org.
This podcast was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.